it'll be recorded. Okay, I said we were going to start on time. We're starting on time. Hello and welcome. My name is Aska Hisa, and I am the Director of Learning and Engagement at ICALA, and it is tax time. So here to help is Amy Davila, who is the founder of ArtSmart Inc. And Amy is that really special breed of human who started off with an undergraduate study in art history. So started off with a love of art and then got into finance and accounting and obtained an MBA. So with this savvy, she worked her way up the world of art, notably working as a director at one of the biggest galleries, David Zwirner Gallery in New York. And then in 2011, she, thank goodness, started ArtSmart Inc. to direct that wisdom, that right-left brain wisdom toward artists, galleries, nonprofits, and creative professionals of many stripes so that she can help us all achieve success. Full disclosure, ICALA uses ArtSmart Inc.'s very helpful services. But we've partnered before. This is the second time we are doing this program to provide you with some tax basics and information on how to run an artist studio. But if you'd really like to get into it, we do get into it deeper. We suggest that you reach out to Amy and ArtSmart Inc. to know more or personalize your plan. Amy will begin with a little more background about herself and then quickly launch into the session because we want to keep this to a tight hour. And of course, we will have room for questions. And we will actually monitor the Q&A box. So please type in your questions. If you have a really burning question while the presentation is happening, we'll take a break in the middle to sort of address those questions. But please share your thoughts and write those questions. So we're recording this and you will be able to access it later on our YouTube channel or on our website. You can share it. But thank you for being here. We really hope this helps. And so now I'm going to give it to Amy.
Thank you so much, Aska. And thank you to the ICA for having me back. It is tax season and we are all frantically trying to get all of our taxes done. I worked in galleries for many years. I've worked with artists for many years, and this is, just all of the things that we've compiled over the years as far as best business practices for studios, how to maximize your tax deductions, things that maybe you wouldn't normally think about. But basically, and this is what I kind of tell all of my new clients, is that knowledge is power. Knowing your numbers is not just for taxes. Yes, we have to fill our taxes out. Yes, we have to pay our taxes, but knowing how much money is coming in, knowing where it's going and how to budget yourself, understanding cash flow, it helps sustain a studio, a healthy studio. And that's the goal. The goal is to do things the right way, do things in an efficient way, save money, but prolong the career of your art practice as long as humanly possible. The only way to do that is to make money and know where the money is going. And so that's what we really encourage artists to do, is really think about their studio practice as a business. And I say that not in like, oh, you should sell out or anything like that, but I think the concept of starving artist is long gone. And I think that our business really focuses on encouraging artists to think about looking at their numbers and being an active participant in their numbers, and not to rely on other people such as their galleries or people that, their peers, things like that. Really, I think understanding your numbers, understanding where the money is, when it's coming in and how it's leaving your account is really important. So with that said, I'm going to launch into bookkeeping, and I'm gonna go straight to basically what I call the chart of accounts. So that's just a fancy way of saying money coming in, money going out, and how it's categorized. And so when you produce your art, there are costs associated with that. So anything that's directly related to fabricating, making, producing the work is considered a cost of goods sold. And again, that's just kind of a more of an accounting term. But what you should always think about is your materials, your material costs, what goes into making the work. That could even include what goes into displaying the work, a pedestal, a cleat, a frame. But mostly we're really focused on tracking all of the costs that go into making the work. If you're a painter, canvas, paint. If you're a videographer, then perhaps your props, things that go into making the work. So that's really the first thing that you will be deducting. And what's really interesting, and this is another thing that I encourage clients to do, is to really separate out your personal expenses from your studio/business expenses. If, let's say, you use flowers in your art making, and you purchase those flowers at Ralph's or Albertsons, there's no way for me as an auditor, if you got audited by the IRS or the state, to say, well, there's all these Ralph charges, there's all these charges from Albertsons, there's all these charges from Whole Foods. How do I know that those aren't just you throwing a dinner party and having flour? So what I'm focused on as an auditor is there a clear distinction between the personal and the business? And so I'm always encouraging artists to set up 2 different accounts and really be methodical about how they're tracking their costs. It's way easier for me to defend an artist and show examples. Well, they use flowers in their art. Here are the receipts from these vendors. Yes, it might look like groceries, but it's actually not. So the only way to actually prove this is to maintain records and to have consistency with how you're using the accounts. I know a lot of people bleed over personal and business. Everybody has done it before. The goal is to get into the habit and the practice of having one credit card designated for your studio, or one checking account dedicated to the studio, so that all of those expenses are actually going from that account. And it's just cleaner. It also helps you stay organized. And if you ever got audited, it's a much cleaner and defensible way to show somebody that this is a business and this is dedicated to the business. So the other expenses that are associated with the cost of running a studio might not have anything to do with actually producing the work, but they are costs associated with maintaining the studio. So I'm just going to go down the list, but these are some things to think about. And it kind of depends on how aggressive you want to be with your deductions. And when I say aggressive, I think a lot of artists, when they're first starting out, they are like, I don't want to pay any taxes. I don't have any money. I want to deduct. My whole life is about making my work, so everything should be deductible, which is a great method to follow, except when you're ready to do certain things like buy a house or maybe get a business line of credit. You want to be very careful about how you manage your deductions, because if you are deducting everything and it looks like based on your tax return you make very little money, then it's going to be very difficult to get a mortgage. It'll be very difficult to get a line of credit. So just those are things to really think about. I encourage artists to think about not just the immediate tax return that's due, but what are your goals for the next few years? Because if you're buying a house, they will look at the previous 2 tax years and they're going to average them together. So you have to be really careful about what your strategy is, what your plans are. I know a lot of people are like, we want to save as much money in taxes as possible, but you really do have to think about other ways in which that tax return is used and looked at by a bank, by a lender, and things like that. So just something to consider. The goal is to be smart, and sometimes taking max deduction isn't necessarily the most strategic thing to do. So I'm going to walk you through all of the things that can be deducted, and then you kind of have to make the decision as to, if you should take the deduction or not. So the first thing, and this just kind of goes down the list, and not all of these categories are going to pertain to everyone, but these are just, again, a collection of all possibilities that we've collected over the years of working with various artist studios. So the first one is advertising and marketing. You probably pay a website fee, Squarespace, maybe you have business cards, maybe you've even made some kind of promotional, promotional things for an art exhibition that you were going to have or something like that. Those would all fall under the category of advertising and marketing. Auto expense. So gas, insurance, repair and maintenance. My rule is if you don't have a car dedicated to your art practice, which most people do not, then I use the 80-20 rule. So 80% is for business. That means I'm commuting to and from different clients. You would be going back and forth maybe between your home studio and your studio, or between running errands, like picking up supplies, things like that. So keeping track of those business expenses. And what I do is I take the entire amount of what I use to pay for my car, and then I multiply it times 80%. And so 80% is deductible. That's what I attribute my work versus personal. So 20% personal, 80% business, 80% of that is deductible. Bank fees. If you are commingling your funds and you're using your studio account and your personal account together, which we already discussed is, we want to get into a better practice of separating them out, then anything related to that studio, maintaining a studio card, if there's like an annual fee, or maintaining a studio bank account, those would be deductible. Contract labor. Okay, so any labor that's directly associated with making work. So say you have a dedicated production assistant in your studio, that would fall under the cost of goods sold. So you have cost of goods sold that are material, and you have another cost of goods sold that's labor. So those are directly related to making the work. If you have a studio assistant that's helping you with an archive, let's say, or doing other administrative tasks, then that would go into contract labor in this section. So it's still deductible, and it's still deductible in the same way. It's just in a different part of the tax return. So this could be somebody that you hire to do photography. This could be a web designer. Anybody that's doing a service for the studio would be contract labor. If you paid them $600 or more in 1 year, you have to 1099 them. So that's basically telling the federal government that you paid this person a certain amount of money for services rendered. Again, that could be a tech person, that could be a photographer, that could be maybe somebody that designed a catalog for you. Anything that's service related falls under this category. You have, what I do is, if before I pay anybody any money, I issue them a W-9 to fill out, and that is their name, their address, and their social security number. So then once you have that piece of paper, then you pay them, and then at the end of the year, you collect all your W-9s, and then you have until January 31st to issue them a 1099. And there are many software programs that do this. So you could do it through QuickBooks. You could, I use Track 1099, which is just a company, and they charge you per 1099 that you send out. But that is something that is required by the federal government. The next category is dues and subscriptions. So here's where I get very liberal with my deductions for artists. I think of most dues and subscriptions as, you know, artists they don't exist in a vacuum, right? So you're getting information from all sorts of sources. New York Times, you might have an art forum subscription. You might have, I mean, I'm pretty liberal. I would even consider something like Netflix. Again, you have to be careful because an auditor could say, no, we're going to throw out all the Netflix. But I do think that a lot of times there is a legitimate argument for an artist to deduct certain dues and subscriptions that relate to their practice. So if you're doing research on a movie, or you're doing research, like, you know, some people have Criterion Collection subscriptions and things like that. So again, we have to be careful. You don't want your dues and subscriptions to be so out of whack with all the other deductions, but it is something that is worth tracking. And if you need extra deductions, or you're feeling like, oof, that I need to, you know, really kind of make my deductions more aggressive, then that's something that I've deducted before. Equipment and truck rental. If you rent a truck to take canvases from your studio to an exhibition location, that's deductible. If you rented equipment to make any work, also deductible. Insurance. So we're all, I think, pretty much existing in the state of California. You have to be really careful about, there are certain types of insurances that you have to have now if you employ people. You have to have workers' comp. Insurance is something that I'm really keen on, because certain types of insurances are very affordable, and they are so necessary when something bad happens. So for example, I used to work for a studio, and the studio was on the second floor, and a leak occurred in this one studio. There were all these other studios that were on the first floor. They all got flooded. Work was damaged, materials were damaged, equipment, computers. The landlord had insurance to cover the damage for their building. But the renters, the artists that had studios, didn't realize that they needed renters insurance to cover the damage incurred by the flooding. So even though it was a burst pipe, so it should be covered by the landlord, but it wasn't. Their individual losses were not covered because the insurance that the landlord had was just for the building, not for the renter's contents. So, and the landlords clearly stated in the rental agreement, you must have renter's insurance. But a lot of landlords are not asking for verification of this. So, and they don't point it out in the contract. So a lot of artists get into situations where they're like, oh, well, this is clearly the fault of the landlord, so I should be covered. You're not. So renter's insurance is incredibly cheap. It's about $50 a month. So that's something that I think it can go as low as $35 a month, I think, but it's worth you have to technically have it if you're in a building. Most leases have that stipulation. And if something happens to the building that is the landlord's fault, or it's because of neglect or bad maintenance or whatever, you still are not covered. So be very careful about insurance. I only encourage the insurance that I think is affordable. Also general liability. If you have anyone that's going to come into your studio for any reason, curators, collectors, you want to have a commercial policy. Again, those are very affordable. They're about $55 a month for about $2 million of coverage. So these are just things that you kind of, for me, it's like bare minimum. You really need to have these coverages if you don't already. Interest, yes.
We have one quick question. Do you need a business license or an LLC?
Okay.
To these deductions, to get these deductions?
You do not need an LLC to get these deductions. So this is all happening within your 1040. So your 1040 is your personal return. There's a Schedule C that is your business return, and you don't have to be an LLC. If you're a sole proprietor, which you're just straight up individual, using your social security number, you'll report all the money that you made as an artist, and you'll list out all your deductions as an artist. And then that net, so let's say you net 20,000, then that number pops over into your 1040 on the front page of your 1040 as business income. But all of this is net of your expenses. So if you made $100,000 and you have $80,000 in expenses, you net 20, and that 20 pops over into your personal return. So it's called a flow through. The other question was, do I need a business license? Yes, you do need a business license, but it has nothing to do with these deductions. So in order to operate a business in the city of Los Angeles, you would file for a business license. And again, it's not that then if you don't have a business license, then you can't make these deductions. They're two separate governmental authorities, basically. But it is wise. It's better than getting a notice from the city of LA saying, and they'll calculate what they think you owe. So it's better to just get in front of it and get ahead of it. Artists get an exemption up to 300,000. So if your gross sales aren't at 300,000 yet, you don't have to pay any LA city tax. So it's just worth doing. If you don't do it and they catch you after the fact, then that exemption goes away. And LA city tax is not that much, but it's worth just having your license. You're all above board, and that is definitely part of the due diligence factor. I don't want to get too deep into LLCs because there's a lot of factors of why somebody would choose to become an LLC. You know, it really depends on what your net business income is and what you have in regards to personal assets. So it's a little bit, it's kind of a bit of a personal decision and a financial decision whether or not to set up an LLC or not. So if anybody wants to, you know, have me do a consultation, then I can do that. If anybody is questioning whether or not they should have an LLC set up. But a lot of artists don't have LLCs. They just are sole proprietors, and they still are allowed to take advantage of all of these deductions. So I hope that answered the question, but feel free if you have very specific questions about LLCs, just shoot me an email. We'll put my email address in the chat. Going down the list, let's see, interest expense. Okay, so again, if you have a savings account and you're, or any kind of, or if you have balances on your credit cards that are business related, you can deduct the interest expense. Or if you have a loan that's outstanding for the business, for the studio, then you can deduct those interest expenses. Internet and computer expense, that's pretty self-explanatory. If you buy a computer and it's under $2,500, you can deduct the full amount, so you don't have to depreciate the computer. License and fees, so the state of California has a license and a fee associated with it. The city of LA sometimes has license and fees associated with it, so those are actually deductible. Meals and entertainment, the rule has been for a while that you get 50% of your meals and entertainment deducted, but they did away with that. So it's still worth tracking, but it's not as, you know, it usually ends up being something that gets wiped away by the deduction when you actually calculate it into the form in like TurboTax or whatever. Medical expenses, mileage, office expenses. So this could be office supplies, ink, paper, anything like that. Payroll. So the state of California is very, very strict about who they deem an employee. If someone works for you, even if it is part-time, even if it's temporary, if they are coming into your space, using your equipment under your direction, that qualifies them as being an employee. So there's a few ways to get around this. I have an independent contractor employment agreement, like a short kind of form. But really, if you get caught by the state of California, they are very, very strict, and they will penalize you $10,000 per employee that they deem as an employee. So I just wouldn't mess around with it. If you signed up for QuickBooks Online, there's a payroll module inside the program, and so you can basically become an employer, and then you're withholding taxes, and then you're paying taxes. But again, that's something, to me, it's not worth gambling if somebody is, and also it protects the employee, as we saw with COVID. You know, it's so much, it's very beneficial if they pay into the system, right? If they pay unemployment, disability, all of these things, Social Security. We want people to be paying into the system so that they can use the system when they need it. So I've been very encouraging to all of my clients that, and it also helped employers tremendously if they did have payroll during the pandemic, because they got grants associated with how many people were on their payroll. So we saw the benefits of employers who did it the right way when we all went through all of this trauma with COVID. So I highly encourage you to, if you do have people that work for you, make them an employee and set up payroll. And all of those fees associated with payroll are deductible. Postage, professional services like myself or a lawyer, those are deductible. If you did a publication, a catalog, those costs are deductible. Recruiting expenses, if you have to put in an ad on NYFA or Indeed, those are deductible. Your rent. So if you have a studio in your home, in order for this to be deductible, in order for you to calculate how do you get to the deduction for your studio, it's based on square footage. So you look at the total square footage of your living space, and then whatever is dedicated to your studio, you percentage that out and you allocate expenses based on that percentage. So if your rent is $1,000 and you have 1,000 square feet and 200 of those square feet are used for studio, that means you can deduct $200 of that rent as studio. Same goes for security alarm, janitorial, utilities, Anything that's associated with your living space, a portion of that that's dedicated to studio is deductible.
Amy,
Yes.
there is a question that someone's asking about traveling outside of their studio and having expenses for work remotely. For example, if they have to rent an Airbnb for something, is that deductible?
Yes. Yes, it is. Yes. Travel is just a little further down, so I'll get into that too. Repairs and maintenance, research. Okay, so research is such a gray area to me, especially when it comes to artists and producing and creating. This to me is like R&D, right? So if you are researching new materials, if you are thinking of moving into a different medium or exploring different ways to make something, I put those things into research. Some people put them into production materials because it's too hard to like, oh my gosh, what was that used for? And what was that used for? So it's fine. What it does though, and again, like the more detailed you get, the more granular you get with this information, the more it just helps you for the future. So a lot of times artists will start off just doing the basics, right? They get a QuickBooks account or they have an Excel spreadsheet and they're kind of tracking things. As the practice gets more robust, as you have more people helping you, as you're making more money, you want to start teasing out these little nuances of expenses. So a lot of times this is when artists look at what actually went into the fabrication versus what was research and development. And also they're tracking it not in this big lump, but they're actually tracking it by exhibition or practice or series or medium. So there are many ways to do this. I use QuickBooks because there's also job tracking. So let's say you had to produce something for a particular show. You could track that via class, meaning you could give it like a subcategory, or you could track it via job. So let's say you were making something for Freeze Soul or something like that. So it's like an art fair and a location. So you could get very methodical about how you track certain things in order to understand, was that lucrative? Was that a break-even project? Was that a moneymaker? Oh, we need to do more of those perhaps, or maybe we need to do one of these projects a year because it was such a big success. So there's ways in which to categorize things for taxes and simultaneously categorize them for your own information so that you can make educated decisions for the future. So these are just kind of ways in which you kind of start and then you can add on more detail. Let's see. Security, we talked about that. Shipping, that I feel like is probably very self-explanatory. Storage, supplies, taxes and licenses, travel. Okay, so travel, meals and incidentals of travel are also like meals and entertainment. It's been cut by 50%. Transportation, even if it's local, deductible. Accommodations, if you have to rent an Airbnb or if you are traveling, hotel, things like that, deductible. What's really important, and this, I just finished an audit about 6 months ago, and the auditor was questioning all the travel. So artists obviously travel a great deal. If I were you, and this would have saved us so much time if we had had this, and you can do this in QuickBooks or you could do this in an Excel spreadsheet, but to track why you traveled. Was it to scout a location for an exhibition? Was it for a project? Was it a commission? You know, was it research? whatever it is to document the length of time, where you stayed, airline, whatever, rough estimates of cost, things like that, is really important, and why you traveled, because that's the one thing that the auditor discounted. They were like, there's $30,000 of travel for 1 year, and we're like, yeah, because this artist went to 5 different cities, for these different reasons, for various exhibitions, projects, a biennial, all these things. But auditors really have to be walked through these, like, why would an artist travel so much? They don't understand that that's very much part of what an artist does. They're traveling all over the world sometimes for various reasons, for exhibitions and things like that. So if you kept track of it in real time and you ever got audited, it would be a major time saver. And then of course, utilities and everything that goes into that. So this isn't everything. This is a pretty comprehensive list. If there's anything that has that you've deducted or that you're questioning, I get asked this a lot, like clothing. That's a big one. I've got a fancy opening. I needed to go and spend some money. Is that deductible? Technically, it is not deductible. If you had to buy something to cover your clothing because you work with toxic materials, that is deductible. Let's say you hosted a bunch of curators to your studio and you dry cleaned a bunch of tablecloths or something, that would be deductible. If you dry cleaned your clothing for an opening, that would not be deductible. Yes, you could argue that it's marketing. Yes, you could argue all sorts of things, that it's industry standard or part of, an artist's life, but I've been in audits before, and that's never been an acceptable argument that I have won. So just keep that in mind. So I am going to move into this. Do we have time for more? We have time, right? Yeah.
Oh, we have about 25 minutes.
Okay, perfect. I didn't know what time we had. Okay, so what I would like to move into is, let me just bounce over to this real quick. So some artists get this, some artists don't. I think it's actually a really useful thing to have. If you buy materials, you can save on tax of those materials if you have a resale certificate. So it's not that hard to get. You can go online, California Resale Certificate, you can just Google it, you can apply, and what you can do is you can take that number into any Blick, any Home Depot, and if you present the resale certificate, then they won't charge you sales tax. The catch is that you have to file a yearly return that just says, and again, if you collect sales tax, you would have to report that and pay that. But so sales tax is kind of twofold. One is when you buy materials, you can save on the taxes that the Home Depot would charge you. Okay, so there's that. The other side of resale is if you're selling directly out of your studio to a collector that lives in California, you have to collect sales tax. You have to collect it, so that means that you would invoice that collector for, let's say, $10,000 plus sales tax on top of that $10,000. So right now it's 9.5%. You would collect that, and then you would pay the state of California. But if you never sell anything out of your studio and you never collect sales tax, then all you're doing is filing a zero return. So you still have to do the filing, but you're not paying anything to the state. So you just have to kind of, it's like an informational return basically. But it is something that you do have to do. Otherwise, if they don't get a return from you, then they revoke your resale certificate. You don't get like any kind of penalty as far as like a fee assessed, but then you have to go through the process again of getting a resale certificate. But it is very handy and it saves money if you buy a lot of materials. So that's something I encourage artists to do. Let's see. Did that. So now I want to go to best business practices for an artist. And this, it's called the life cycle. It basically walks you through an exhibition. So you start out and you've been asked to be in an exhibition. And so it starts at the top. The first thing is, you're buying materials. So how does that feed into what we've been talking about, right? So bookkeeping. So bookkeeping consists of tracking what you're spending. And if you want to get really nuanced about it, you could even track what project this is for, or what exhibition it's for, or what series this is for. You can save money, like we just talked about with getting a resale certificate or a retail certificate. So the next phase of the life cycle is you now begin production. So you begin fabrication. I'm going to just touch on a couple of these tools that we offer to artists, but we don't really have a lot of time to get into all the details. But one of the things that I really encourage artists to do is to have your own archive. It is something I have seen over time being quite essential. Once you make a work, once that work has been sold, you may never see that artwork again. And it becomes quite important to understand who your collector is, how much did you charge them, or how much did a gallery charge them? Where does the work exist now? How much did it cost to make that work? What does it look like? A lot of artists, I think, get caught up in the moment. They make something and then they just hand it over to a gallery or hand it over to the collector without getting proper documentation, without making any kinds of, an archive of that work. It becomes really important as you grow and as you start to have a career. And let's say you change galleries, let's say you get a new gallery and they're going to ask a very, very important question. Who are your collectors? Where are they? Where's the work? It's really important to know these things. If you rely on a gallery to document these things and record this information, and let's say you have a falling out with the gallery, let's say you want to expand and go to another gallery or whatever, the likelihood of this gallery sharing that information with you is very low when the relationship isn't optimal anymore. So that is why it's so important to gather this information in real time. And the other thing that you get if you do have an exhibition or if you are represented by a gallery eventually, they pay for photography. So you should be getting a copy of that high-res image and putting that into your database. So that's like free money. That's like money on the table. You would have to pay for that photography yourself. So you might as well be getting a high-res image of that artwork. The other thing that's on here is this cost benefit matrix. What that is, and this is kind of goes to this concept of knowledge is power. What I've done for a lot of artists, and a lot of times they ask me this, especially if they're working in multiple mediums. So let's say an artist has a photography practice, a painting practice, and they also make films as well. A lot of times what they're trying to discern is what goes into making that piece cost-wise, how much time does it take me, and what is the price point of that work? What is it being sold for? And this is really important, because time is the thing you can't get back, right? You can make more money, you can save money, but time you can't get back. So when we're doing a cost benefit analysis, if something is taking a tremendous amount of time and you only have a certain amount of time before you have to produce a show, and you have to price out what each of these things are going to get you, right? So you're constantly looking at every single medium, how many pieces, how much is that going to cost, and how much time is it going to take? So what we do is we build like a matrix, and we kind of weigh all of these things, and we toggle between like, okay, 5 paintings, 2 photographs, 1 film, or what if the combination was 5 photographs and 2 paintings and 2 films? And again, this isn't an aesthetic decision, right? This isn't like a decision that's being made based on what you conceive of the show to be, but it's information nonetheless. And it's important information if you have a finite amount of time and the gallery is trying to understand, like, how much should we price this work? What went into it? Do we need more of another medium because it is more cost beneficial for everyone to have? So these are things, again, like, it's not to say that you're going to make all your decisions based on money or based on cost, but it is an important factor when you are dealing with a finite amount of time. So that's another tool that we offer. So then the next section is running your studio, right? So you're making the work, you're documenting the work as it's happening, you're trying to decide which work to make, and you're running your studio. You know, you've got to pay people, you've got to track your expenses, how much cash is coming in, how much money do we need to spend on this next piece. So tracking that information is really important. And I use QuickBooks Online. I think it's the easiest way to track everything. Documenting the work in progress. So this kind of gets more to like social media and how to kind of promote yourself. But what we do when we consult with our clients, specifically artists, is like looking at what it takes, like the kind of just like a peek into the studio, works in progress, what's happening behind the scenes. Consignment agreement. So when the work is complete, the thing that we encourage, I mean, this is one of those things like renter's insurance. I'm like, you have to have it. Consignment agreement. It's one of those things that I really hammer home to artists, especially if you don't have a pre-existing relationship with the gallery or the institution. Have a consignment agreement. It can be 1 page, it can be super simple. I have a template, and these things really have to address key things. 1, it should have an image of the piece. Then there will be no discrepancy of like, well, what piece are we talking about? The piece should have a title, it should have dimensions, a medium, year, and most importantly, a price of what you want this piece to be priced at. The other component is time. How long does this person have the right to sell this work? It's very important to have a time limit, 6 months, a year, the length of the show, 30 days after the show closes, what discount you will share. When does the gallery have to alert you if they want to give a bigger discount than, let's say, 10%? Let's say an institution comes and wants to buy 5 works, and the gallery's like, we have to extend a 20% discount. At least you get the information ahead of time versus when you receive your wire, when you're like, wait a second, why is this discounted 20%? The consignment agreement only said 10%. The other thing that's very important to include in a consignment agreement is how much did it cost you to make this work? So galleries will reimburse you for half of your production, but you have to tell them what that production is up front. Meaning you have to know, after you've made the work, after you've tracked all the expenses, how much did it cost to make that work? And that's something that should be outlined in the consignment agreement. The other thing that is in the consignment agreement is, who did the work sell to? Typically galleries will tell you the name of the client, the city and the state, or the city and the country. So that's another important component of the consignment agreement. The consignment agreement isn't to say that nothing will go wrong. Things go wrong all the time, but it sets a tone with the institution or the gallery that you're going to be working with. It shows your level of professionalism. It shows that you care. It shows that you're tracking these things. And these are more and more common. I would say 10 years ago, no one had consignment agreements, or they were very loose. But now more and more, most of the galleries and most of the artists that I work with do have consignment agreements with their galleries and with any institution that they're going to be exhibiting with. Next thing is, before you ship the work out, you should have a signed consignment agreement. That is a huge red flag if you don't. Meaning, if the gallery has, or the institution, wherever you're sending the work to, hasn't sent back the signed consignment agreement, I would think very carefully about sending the work. You have no protection whatsoever. Not that you have no protection, but it shows a lack of professionalism. And I would highly discourage moving forward with somebody that doesn't give you that back before you ship the works. So that's something to really consider. Let me skip down to invoicing. So artists that I've worked with in the past have been very loath to invoice a gallery. And they say, or their comment to me is like, oh, that seems so greedy, or that seems like kind of annoying. But I would say go through the routine, the habit of creating an invoice. You don't necessarily have to send the invoice, but if you do it through QuickBooks, then what you've done is, so let's say so-and-so's at an art fair and they text you and they're like, oh my gosh, the work sold to blah, blah, blah. Isn't it awesome? Great. Okay. So what you can do with that information is you can go into QuickBooks, you can create an invoice to the gallery for the amount of what was on the consignment agreement. If they said, oh, we offered a 10% discount or whatever, you could even factor the discount in your invoice, less what it costs for you to make the work, half, okay? And then you don't have to send the invoice. You can save it and it will save inside QuickBooks. What it does is it reminds you in 30 days that that invoice is due, which is a reminder to you to reach out to the gallery and say, oh, has that collector paid yet? When can I expect payment? It is a reminder that is so easy, and it really helps keep track in one place, money coming in, the potential money coming in. It also walks you through the exercise of doing the math, because then when that wire does come through, or you do get a check and it doesn't match up to the invoice, at least you're like, wait, why? Why didn't it match up? What's the reason? Oh, they didn't pay me half of my production. Oh, they extended a 20% discount, but didn't let me know. So it's a really good exercise to go through, even if you don't send that invoice, just to have that in one location. And also, to see like, how long does it, you can track, how long does it usually take to get paid? Artists are expecting money to come in, and cash flow is the biggest rub with artists, the biggest issue. even if this is like a super famous artist that's, you know, showing in three different galleries, cash flow is so challenging because collectors are slow to pay. Sometimes galleries are slow to pay. So keeping track of this is really important because you could very easily start to lose track of what's been sold. And also going back and looking at a consignment agreement, very important. So if I were you, if you have any consignment agreement and you're like, this exhibition ends on this day, make a calendar alert for yourself and find out, you know, when you will be getting paid for certain works, who they sold to. You should really be demanding an artist statement from the gallery so that it will show you exactly who bought the work, what it sold for, what discount was extended. Really, really important.
We have about 4 more minutes. So
Are there any
questions? There's maybe one question where somebody said, do you need a business license if you're self-employed?
Yes.
Okay, that's answered. That's it in terms of questions in the Q&A box. My question to you is, would you be able to provide your chart of accounts slide and this Art Smart Life Cycle slide? That's because it's hard to read a little bit.
Sorry about that. I'm wondering if I can make it bigger. Yes, absolutely. I can absolutely provide that. It's, to me, like a lot of artists, what they do is they just like print this out and they like tack it up on their, you know, like a cork board or something like that. I would say overall, it is, as you are making work, at every step of the way, there's something related to cost or related to information that can be tracked. And if you're doing it in real time, or let's say you do it maybe an hour out of the week even, it's incredible how much information you will get out of it. And this isn't just like, hey, this is great information to have. This is money-making information. And that's what I really, you know, when I was, one of my ex-clients, Kari Epson, she put a lot of money into making her art. And we started tracking it in just the most rudimentary way. She would have 5 sculptures happening simultaneously, and we would have a clipboard up on a wall for every artwork that was in progress. And we would write down Home Depot runs. We would write down, you know, hours that people were working on the piece. Because, and again, it was a very rudimentary way. It wasn't a fancy Excel spreadsheet. We couldn't track it in QuickBooks because it was, you know, it was crazy. There's so much going on. And she was like, I need a visual representation of all the expenses. And you could just tell, just based on the lines, how much was going into each piece. So it was a really smart way of visualizing what was going on cost-wise, time-wise, for each thing happening in the studio. So if you don't want to get fancy and you don't want to deal with QuickBooks, or you really hate Excel or whatever it is, there's a lot of different ways: whiteboards, clipboards, corkboards, whatever it is. It's so helpful to start tracking these things as they're happening. It's so much harder to go back in time. No one wants to do that. Everybody wants to move on to the next project, you know? So I would highly encourage you to do this in real time.
Yeah, practice. It's part of the practice.
Yeah.
Amy, we have one last question. Somebody's worried if a job doesn't send you a 1099. I suggest you just keep nagging them. But
Fourth income anyway. So basically, if you are asking somebody for a 1099 and they're not giving it to you, or are you asking them for a W-9 and they're not giving it to you? A 1099, like, this is something that I think is just really, really basic for everybody to know. Always report all of your income. Don't try to cheat by not reporting income. So even if you don't get a 1099 for somebody, don't say, oh, I'm not going to report that income. Still report the income, because the first thing an auditor does when you get audited by the IRS is they're like, give us all your bank statements. And so they just tally up all the deposits and all the wires and all the money that came in. And they're like, why doesn't that match what's on your return? It's the easiest way to get caught. It is the simplest method that the IRS auditors have to catch you. So don't do it. Never, ever, ever not report income. You know, if you are scared about, oh my gosh, I don't have enough money to pay taxes, you know, we can work on deductions, you know, like where there are deductions. But always report the income, because it's the single easiest way to get caught.
Another question in the chat. This is all happening in the chat. I don't know, that's fine. How to report grants and mutual aid. We're going to try to wrap this up, but if you have a quick answer for that.
Yeah, so grants are, most of the time that they are taxable. So you will get a 1099 from, I think it's a 1099, maybe it's a 1098. You will get some information from whoever issued the grant. So that will come. But again, even if you don't get a 1099, I would report it. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, to close out, Amy, people would like your email address, since you had offered it for
Let me
to reach you. ArtSmart Inc. is easy to find online. And then somehow, if you could, we can send the panelists the attendees who had registered slides, if you provide them. But I think you covered a lot.
We did. We've covered a lot.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
And it's so empowering. So thank you. And there you go. a@artsmartinc.com, artsmartinc.com.
And I'll send those slides over to you, Oscar, and then you can just shoot those out. But thank you all for your questions. If you want to reach out to me, feel free. And thank you so much for having me.
We might have a little survey at the close of the Zoom to the panelists. We appreciate any feedback. So that's it. Have a great day, and courage with the taxes.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.